If you're new or if you have difficulty maintaining stable attention with the breath, then you should just stay with holding your attention on the breath for the whole time that you're practicing, until there is some sense of consistency in terms of being able to maintain your attention where you're placing it. Because otherwise, if you go to the second part and you're practicing being an open awareness, choiceless awareness, and you just keep going back to the thought process, it's going to be more frustrating if you're not able to have any kind of stable attention. The most important thing about being trained to practice meditation, other than the basic instructions and the understanding of what you're doing, is to appreciate the fact that consistency is everything. Consistency is everything. When you were learning how to read in school, right, every day you read the book. Every day you learned new words, right? And then over a period of time, you could read. Right? It took several years, actually, and when you could read, you didn't have to read every word anymore. You didn't have to even think about reading. You just were able to read. You look at something that's written and your brain reads it automatically and naturally. In the same way, if you practice meditation consistently, correctly, as it's intended, with an understanding of what you're doing and why you're doing it, which will give you the motivation to do it consistently, then over time you will begin to notice that you're experiencing less irritation, less restlessness, right? Less of a need to move, and more calm. The mind gets calmer, the body gets more relaxed, and you're able to start to really experience what it's like to be present. And because I'm a psychologist, I'm interested in how this is going to have an impact on your personality, how this is going to have an impact on your behavior, right? Because psychology and psychotherapy is about your behavior and your experience of yourself. And the people that come to psychotherapy come because they're suffering from anxiety or depression, or they're suffering from dysfunctional relationships, right? And one of the things that is becoming more understood is that there's a very powerful and important relationship between spiritual practices, meditation, and psychotherapy. I would go as far as to say that if you learn how to meditate and you do it correctly and you do it consistently, you will be in a psychotherapeutic process. Right? Because you will be in a process that will allow you over time to relieve yourself of psychological and emotional suffering, right? And that will happen naturally because you have an understanding through the teachings of what the source of suffering is, right? I hope by now, for those of you who have been coming consistently, that you know the answer to that question, you know, what causes suffering, right? It's very important to know the answer to that question because that's very much of an essential aspect of how the practice of meditation works, to relieve suffering. Well, how does it relieve suffering? It relieves suffering by your being aware of yourself, right? Aware of yourself. So in other words, you're aware of awareness, right? And you're aware that you are not your mind, you are not your body, you are not the personality. At least you're not only that. We say in the beginning of the teachings that you're not your body, you're not your personality. And the reason in the beginning of the teachings that it's often said that way is because you think you are, and that's all you are. So we're saying, no, you're not. But then as you get further along in the teachings, then we go back and say, well, you really are, because in non-dual teaching, there isn't two things. It's not your awareness and your personality are two different things. It's the same thing, but your personality is a very limited form of awareness. And if that's all you consider yourself to be, There will be suffering because in that limited form of awareness, you consider yourself to be a body, you consider yourself to be separate from everybody else, you consider yourself to be separate from life, right? And in that condition, you're trying to do the impossible. In that condition, you're trying to be satisfied, you're trying to be happy, you're trying to be peaceful. And that's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen because in that condition, you will be continuing to be in conflict with reality. That's the source of suffering. The source of suffering is that you, as a person who considers yourself separate from the world, considers yourself a physical body, right? The mind is constantly generating a story, constantly generating judgments and evaluations about everything that's happening all the time, right? And so you find yourself in conflict with life. When it's raining, you don't like it, right? When people behave a certain way around you, you don't like it. You get upset, you get angry, you get frustrated. The alarms go off, your body gets into the fight or flight syndrome. So you're uncomfortable, right? And so you try to desperately control everything, which is impossible because everything is changing and the thoughts are always changing, the feelings are always changing, the whole thing is unstable. It's an impossible situation. Now, in this room, I say, in this context, in what we're talking about here, that means you're crazy. That means you're crazy. And that means that most of humanity is crazy. When you leave this room and you go out there, where everybody else is crazy too, you're normal. That's one of the problems, right? Is that what's considered normal is crazy, but because everybody's crazy, nobody notices how crazy they are, right? And they point the finger at each other, blaming each other for being the way they are, and everybody's living in conflict and turmoil, struggling, trying to get satisfied, living in trying to have hope and pray that in the future things get better, that you'll get what you want, that someday you'll be happy. Of course, if you're paying attention, you realize that that's never going to happen. It hasn't happened yet, and if you look around at people who are older, it doesn't happen. As long as you're living in this condition of being in this limited identity as a body and as a person, that's never going to happen. On the other hand, if you take on these teachings and you learn that while it is necessary for you to identify yourself as a body and identify yourself as a separate person and a personality, while that's necessary to be in this time-oriented reality, right, in which everything appears to be a certain way, right? Everybody appears to be separate from one another, right? Time appears to be real, right? Appears to be a certain way. So in this reality of appearances and illusion, you have to participate in the dream, right? You have to participate in the dream by learning how to live in time, learning how to live as a personality, right? Learning how to get along as a personality. But that's not the end of the story. A fulfilled life is a life that at a certain point you have succeeded in being able to function in the world of time. You have succeeded in functioning in the world as a personality. And now it's time to realize that that's a limited way of existing, and that's not at all what you are. What you are is way beyond that. And that's the next stage in life. That's the next stage of maturity. And life is actually set up to get you to go on to the next stage if you look at it, right? Because as you get older, it gets worse, right? So it's actually pushing you to wake up, you see. If you are not as fortunate to get old, or if you're not as fortunate to get old without going through a lot of trauma and a lot of loss and a lot of upset, then you'll be being pushed earlier on in life, right? But you see, the people who suffer things like that earlier on in life, that discover the truth about themselves, right, and end up liberated, end up free, they look back at it and say, that's the best thing that ever happened to me, right? Because it forced me to take a look at my life and examine who I am and examine reality. It forced me to look around and discover that there are teachings and practices that are intended to liberate you from this limited form of life in which there is suffering. And that's why I said what I said earlier, that in the world we're living in right now, and the situations that we're dealing with right now with the virus and the political situation, right, your brain and your mind is going to run the program that it always runs about everything that is threatening, or everything that you're afraid of, or everything that you're frustrated by. It's going to run that programming. There's nothing you can do about it, right? But in these practices, we're practicing being aware that you're not your mind. And therefore, you don't have to be an identity that is in your mind. You can discover through these teachings and practices, right, that all that you are, all that you think of yourself as, is simply just another thought, just another idea. And when you are trying to be a consistent person, right, in an unstable condition in which your thoughts are changing all the time and your feelings are changing all the time and the circumstances you're in are changing all the time, right? When you're trying to do that, it's a full-time job, isn't it? Yeah, you've got to think all the time, well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, what's going to happen tomorrow? What happened yesterday? Well, what about this person? How do I behave? How do I react? It's a full-time job, right? So you're driving yourself crazier all the time, and you're burning up all this energy, right, to try and be in control of something that you will never be in control of. And that's one of the reasons why, if you practice meditation and you understand these teachings, as time passes, the system calms down, and guess what? You have more energy available, right? You're able to experience being peaceful and calm. One of the ways that life has been described is that it's like a ship that sails, right? And it's a ship that sails out to sea, never to return. Isn't that true? You're born and your life goes like a ship out to sea, and you're never coming back. It's important to see these things because they're the truth. That's reality, right? And as you practice meditation, you're learning how to live in reality. You're learning how to live in reality. And in reality, one of the most important things to notice is impermanence. Everything's always changing, right? That's reality. Everything's always changing. And you're living in a time body, right? And you will experience sickness, old age, and death. All of us will, right? And in between, you will experience being subject to whatever happens, and that's totally unpredictable, right? So that's life, that's reality, that's the way it is, right? The question is, will you be attempting to control that? Will you be attempting in that unstable reality to try and be stable? And will you stay ignorant because you don't see that you can't win the game? Or will you begin to be disillusioned enough to look and see, is there something I'm missing here, right? Is there something that somebody has come up with that is an answer to this problem that seems to be unsolvable? And what you'll discover is, yes, there is a solution to the problem. The solution to the problem is the truth, is to be able to experience the truth of what you are, which is not the body or the personality. They are limited expression of awareness, but beyond that is an infinite awareness that has its own intelligence. And when you bring that into the picture, right, then that allows you to be with whatever comes up in life and to have a mind that continues to play the same programming and have the same reactions, right? But who you are now is liberated. It's free from suffering from that. You can recognize that your personality is unstable and that it's changing all the time, and that today you like this and tomorrow you like that. That's just the way the personality is, right? It's changing all the time. But that's not a problem anymore because that's not who you are, you see? If that is who you are and you're trying to be something that's consistent, then you'll always fail and always be frustrated, and you'll be a mental case. You'll be crazy, right? But if you come to the awareness, if you wake up through these teachings and practices and you realize that you're the awareness of that, not that personality. You're aware of the thoughts, you're not the thinker of the thoughts. The thoughts are just happening like the weather. And because that's the case, it's possible for you to actually be satisfied and enjoy your life. And the way you're relating to what you can't control and the way you're relating to what's unstable is from a place that is stable, is from a place that doesn't change. The awareness is always exactly the same, is it not? It never changes. It's the only place where there's any stability. And if you recognize that this is the essence of what you are, it's your ground of being, and if through these teachings and practices you come out of the insanity, you go sane, right? You come out of the illusions and see things as they actually are, then you begin to experience satisfaction. You begin to experience that life is actually easy, because instead of being hit by the waves of change and the waves of challenge and turmoil and so forth, instead of being hit by the waves, you learn how to surf, right? So now you're on top of the waves, riding the waves, and that's a lot easier and a lot more enjoyable. So that's a metaphor for what it's like to be awake and see things as they are. You see, the practice of meditation, if it succeeds, if you do it consistently over time, eventually you'll be doing it when you're not doing it formally. You'll be doing it in your life when it's more important than any other time. You'll be doing it when you're faced with the challenges of life. So, you know, for those of us who are older, right, you can either look at the fact that you're aging and your body's falling apart, right, and you're getting closer to the end of your life and so forth. You can either look at that as something that you're terrified about, or something that you're really anxious about, something that you're really upset about, right? Or you can look at it like, oh, these are circumstances that are pushing me to wake up to the truth. And the feedback you'll get as you get older and you get diagnosed, you will get diagnosed, right? Sooner or later, you're going to get diagnosed with something, right? It's not whether you're going to die, it's what's going to kill you, right? So you will get diagnosed. And when that comes, are you going to be ready, right? So one of the ways that meditation is spoken of in the traditions is you're preparing for death. You're preparing all of your life for the inevitables that are going to come in on you at the last portion of your life. And if you've prepared correctly, you'll be able to be satisfied and happy and enjoy the experience you're having at that time of your life. And be prepared to let go of your life and have had a life of satisfaction, and most of all, had a life of fulfillment. You fulfilled the possibility of life. You fulfilled the potential you had as a human being by realizing what you really are, so that you can let go in the end, right? Because the awareness that you are has no beginning. Remember all this stuff from the invitation, right? The awareness that you are has no beginning, right? It's not going anywhere. It doesn't need anything. It doesn't want anything, right? It's naturally happy just because it is, just because it exists, right? Right? And because it doesn't exist in time and it doesn't have a beginning or an end, if you come into having that as an experience that you have a conviction about, then death is nothing. Death is nothing. This was what was talked about even in the Christian context, right? I offer you life everlasting. What's that mean? Well, there's a you that won't die. That's what it means, right? But unless you wake up to that you will suffer while you're alive, and then you will suffer at death. So that's why, if you really, and I've said this before, you know, if you really get what this is about, you'll realize that it's crazy not to meditate. It's crazy not to learn the truth. It's crazy. not to meditate or learn the truth. But you see, if you're living in that world where crazy is normal, you can't see that. You'll keep trying, right? When I get to retirement, that's the big one. When I get to retirement, right? Well, if you get to retirement and you're honest with yourself, you realize that you made a big mistake waiting until you got to retirement. Waiting for what? So you have time on your hands to be crazy? Right? So you have time on your hands to be afraid and worry about your death? So you have time on your hands, to be anxious and concerned about your body falling apart? That's what people are looking forward to in the so-called normal world. Right? So when you wake up and you see things as they are, you don't look forward anymore. You are present to what's happening right now. That's where life is happening. Your life is never going to be anywhere but in the present moment. Everything else is an illusion. You can't live in the past or the future because it's not real. It's just a concept. It's just an idea. But you can live in the present. That is real. And you can be what you actually are. That is real. So that's what's available. And if you're coming to this class, as I said, I think in the last class, I'm repeating myself ad infinitum, right? Because this stuff is not that deep, right? But I have to keep repeating it, just like the instructions for meditation. I have to keep repeating it, right? Because in the state of mind you're in, you'll keep falling back into the stupidity. You'll keep falling back into the ignorance. You'll keep identifying with your thinking, and you'll keep identifying with the craziness in the world and not realize that it is crazy. You can't get away from it. You have to participate in it, but that doesn't mean you have to be crazy. You can understand that it's crazy, and you can, because you understand that it's crazy, you're able to learn how to respond to it instead of react to it. So, my intention in this class, other than to train you to meditate and encourage you to practice, is to get you clear about what the truth is, right? So you don't keep sleepwalking, right? And that's why I'm happy when I see you all here consistently, right? Because you need to keep coming back and making contact with this over and over again to get it into your, to get it into your head, get it into your heart, and see it for what it really is, so that you're motivated enough to do the practice every single day and to keep paying attention to the teachings. I sent out a link to a guy named James Lowe. Have any of you seen that? Yeah, one of the reasons that I like him is because he is a meditation teacher and a Buddhist teacher in a very high level, but he's also a psychotherapist. So when he talks about meditation and he talks about these teachings, he talks about it in a way to help you understand it in terms of the psychology, how it shows up in the way you are as a person. So I really encourage you to watch that video of him. He's got a lot of videos on YouTube. But that's one of the other things about this is that, if you're not naturally motivated to keep using the resources you have available, and you have more resources available to you now than human beings have ever had in the history of humanity. Given the internet, you have availability to an unlimited number of teaching and teachers. Every single day I discover somebody new. You know that because I keep referring them to you, right? And if you understand the importance of these teachings and practices, you become a student of wisdom, a wisdom student, and you start to look for the books and look for the YouTube videos, and you spend time watching them to develop and deepen your understanding of all this stuff. And so it becomes a natural thing for you, to stay in that process, right? And to keep practicing the meditation. And if you do that, you'll begin noticing your life is getting easier. you'll begin noticing that you're less distressed, you're less upset, you're more able to relate to the people around you effectively. Okay. Enough said. So I'll send you back into the insanity.